Hello and welcome to the Special Olympics Australia webinar series, Autism Inclusion in Sport, Recreation and Physical Education. This is webinar 4, Sensory Sensitivities and Regulation. My name's Sarah Whedon and on behalf of Special Olympics Australia. I'm really pleased you can join us for this webinar today. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the many lands from which we gather and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Now, this is the 4th webinar in our 6-part series, and today we'll explore a range of sensory sensitivities that people with autism may need to manage in both their everyday lives and with a physical activity setting. And taking some learnings from the amazing Prue Stevenson, who presented her lived experience of autism in our last webinar, I'd like to take a positive language approach that she used and reframe what's often called a sensory processing disorder and use the term a widened sensory perception. So this webinar will provide you with information, tools and strategies to support inclusion and regulation of your athletes, students or participants who may have a widened sensory perception. This webinar flows on from our previous 3 webinars in the series, where we explored a general understanding of autism spectrum disorder, the importance and approaches of getting to know your participants, and a range of communication styles and needs and approaches for athletes and students with autism. If you missed any of the webinars in the series, or you'd like to re-watch a recording or access the range of resources, you can do so via the Special Olympics Australia online learning platform, and this is called SOA Learn. So you can find SOA Learn through the Special Olympics Australia website, or just type in SOA Learn in your preferred search engine and you should be able to find it. So just a bit of context of Special Olympics Australia. Special Olympics has a long and established history, and it's a global sporting community and inclusion movement which has been supporting and empowering people with intellectual disability all around the world for about 50 years. And it was established by the late Eunice Kennedy Shriver, who's sister to US President John F. Kennedy, as well as sister to Rosemary Kennedy, who had an intellectual disability. So today, Special Olympics supports over 5 million athletes in 177 countries and is the only organisation authorised by the International Olympic Committee to use the word Olympics. So in Australia, Special Olympics supports people with intellectual disability and autism through a number of sport, health, education and leadership programs. Offering 19 official sports, Special Olympics Australia provides year-round training as well as competition at a local, state, national and international level, with the pinnacle of the competition ladder being the World Games, and that's hosted on a 4-year cycle in both summer and winter sports. And today we're lucky to have a national competitor and Special Olympics Australia athlete leader, Stephen Lawley, join us as a panellist. I'd like to thank Sport and Recreation Victoria for their support of this webinar series, and this is Sport and Recreation Victoria's commitment to the Victorian Autism Plan, which seeks to provide greater opportunities for choice for people with autism to participate and contribute to the community, and it seeks to address the experiences of exclusion faced by people with autism. And Sean Stevenson from Sport and Recreation Victoria has been a wonderful support for Special Olympics Australia, and I know he's online today and he'll no doubt share his insights and extensive knowledge with you all through the online chat. In reference to the chat, we did learn in our 2nd webinar the importance of asking questions to better understand and support our athletes or students. So I really encourage you to use this webinar to ask questions and be better informed. And your question could be about today's topic about the widened sensory perception, or you might seek the opportunity to ask general questions about how to best include and support people with autism in your program. So please use the chat button on your Zoom toolbar to comment or share your experience with the wider audience. But you can also use the Q&A button to ask specific questions of our panellists, and we do have a dedicated Q&A section at the end of the webinar, but please send your questions through as you think of them. So we have a great lineup of presenters for you today, and they're going to share their learnings, approaches and insights into a widened sensory perception. So Special Olympics Australia athlete leader Stephen Lawley will share his insights of sensory sensitivities and discuss strategies to support athlete needs. VFLW player and autism activist Elise Muller, we've welcomed her back, and she'll share her personal experience of a widened sensory perception and discuss the strategies she's taken and been supported with in her sporting pathway. But first up, Taylah will begin the presentation, and Taylah is the Inclusion Manager at Waverley Gymnastics Centre and is in her final year of a Master of Occupational Therapy, and she's been very busy. She's graduating very soon. So today Taylah will bring a combination of allied health knowledge and practice, as well as frontline inclusion programming and coaching. And Taylah has worked for the last 4 years supporting inclusion within the gymnastics space, and she started her journey at Casey Gymnastics, and she introduced the Wonderless Open Day, which provided more than 100 gymnasts with additional needs the opportunity to engage in gymnastics. Taylah continues her journey at Waverley Gymnastics Centre, and she works to implement inclusive coaching and environments so individuals of all ages and abilities can be included in the programs there. In 2018, Taylah was awarded the Gymnastics Victoria Inclusive Leader of the Year, as well as being a finalist for the Vic Sport Gallagher Victorian Community Coach of the Year award. And Taylah has continued to ensure inclusion and occupational focus are the forefront of the gymnastics community. And today, Taylah will be supported by Kellie Tait, who has featured in all of our webinars so far, and she'll continue to provide her experience, strategies and tools towards autism inclusion. So Kellie's the founder of AAA Sports Ballarat, is the mother of a child with autism, and has just commenced a new role as Youth Engagement Coordinator at Regional Sport Victoria. Kellie works with organisations such as Cricket Victoria and AFL, providing grassroots sporting opportunities for children of all abilities through her program at AAA Sports Ballarat. And these programs have supported hundreds of children since its inception in 2016, and she's won several awards for her innovation within AAA Sports Ballarat. So Kellie's been a keynote speaker at the National Disability Sport Conference. She is the 2018 AFL Blind Premiership winning coach of the Western Bulldogs and two-time Premiership team manager of the Victorian Vikings cricket team. So I'm going to hand over to Taylah and Kellie in just a second. But before we do, Taylah thought that this might be a good introduction to perhaps gaining an insight to the widened sensory experience. I'm going to show you a little clip from the National Autistic Society of the UK. So that is a bit of an insight into some of the sensory challenges that someone with autism may face on a day-to-day basis. But I am going to hand over to Taylah, who will be supported by Kellie to really explore this topic of the widened sensory experience. So over to you, girls.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me on board. So I just wanted to sort of flag some bad habits that I have, and usually my top one is referring to participants as children, and I know that some of you may not just be working with children, maybe adults or individuals of all abilities and ages, but I do refer to individuals as children just quite often because of our specific program. So I guess I'll kick off with sensory meltdown. So I thought it was really important to show that video just before we started to give you a really more of an insight into what sensory meltdown would look like and how this sort of occurs. So a sensory meltdown is a neurological response to an environment around the individual. So they occur when a child or adult sensory system becomes overwhelmed and triggers a fight, flight, or freeze response. And these occur when the individual is forced to lose control as their sensory system is not supported by the environment around them. This may be that the environment is too loud, too bright, or it's overcrowded. And that was sort of simulated in that video that we just saw. Sensory meltdowns are not done for attention, and I think that holds quite a bit of stigma for people who don't understand a sensory meltdown if you see them occur in a shopping centre or in public. So it's really important for us to remember. So tantrums have a desired outcome or a purpose, and usually the conclusion of a tantrum is that the parent either gives in or compromises a solution. And this is not the case for a sensory overload or a meltdown. An individual will need assistance to de-stimulate or calm down. And this can be done with some of the tools that we'll go through today, but they do work differently for each person. So behaviours that may be seen in a sensory meltdown include inflicting pain onto oneself or throwing the self onto the floor, hitting of the body or others, and showing other painful behaviour. They can be supported through planning and knowing the individual and the triggers, as well as altering the environment. So in occupational therapy, we have a focus on the person, the environment, and their occupation. And these are all interrelated, and I suppose they could be provided to your sporting programs as well, as in your classrooms. So in normal people language, in order for the individual to reach or even exceed their potential within their occupation, so we would be looking as their occupation as a student or an athlete, the environment has to support the individual, and this varies for each person. So this is why being adaptable and catering for all types of learners and students is really so important. Next slide, please, Kelly. Thank you. So part of supporting the individual, as we just sort of spoke about, is looking at the zones of regulation. And these are used to understand the changes that need to be made to ensure someone's optimal functioning or performance, whether that's in sport or play. The zones of regulation can be seen as like a thermometer, and I guess there's a couple of visuals that assist me in remembering what they are, but everyone has their own tricks. So these zones are the blue, green, yellow, and red, and just as the thermometer, we want to stay in that green sort of middle section for our optimal learning. Just as the green traffic light says, we're ready to go and we're ready to learn. So when a child is in the blue zone, I remember this one as we're sad and blue, and they may appear as sad, tired, bored, or even move a little bit more slowly. So there are a few tips and tricks that you could use to get them into that green optimal learning zone. You really want to focus on stimulating them and engaging them in play. So usually just being really excited and tapping into their interests will assist with this, but more specifically, you can do a couple of activities such as jumping jacks, run on the spot, talking about why the participant feels this way, or taking a break until the participant feels ready. Another trick is the use of music. So lots of children will respond to the tempo of music to stimulate them. You want it to be upbeat, and it's the opposite. So usually instrumental music, we can use really soft music to de-stimulate and to calm down. And when we look at the yellow zone, this is our slow down zone. This is slowly creeping towards the overstimulated and can be seen as frustrated, worried, silly, wiggling around, or really excited. And we're starting to lose some control at this phase. We need to get them back down into the green zone. So some tools we might use is our deep breathing. There's a couple of really clever deep breathing tricks that some people have come up with. So it's the figure 8 would just be breathing in and then out as you make an 8, and usually there's a visual that can support that. Or what I like to call the birthday cake. So you start with no fingers, and I want you to blow the candles, and you could go all the way up to 5 as they blow the candles on the cake. You can do it the other way as well. Other things that you could use are the stress ball or fidget toys, just taking a minute to drink some water, or using calming zone. Then we'll look at the red zone. So usually I would think of this as stop, or like a red crab, because this is something I want to stay away from. It is those painful behaviours, the mad, angry, yelling, hitting, elated, and out of control. So these situations can be diffused by removing the trigger from the situation, or removing the individual if it gets to a point that needs to happen, and allowing them to go to a quiet zone, or focusing on some breathing. When we look at the regulation of athletes' sensory sensitivities, maintaining that green zone is important to look at the sensory systems and what they are made up of, to know which strategies can help regulate the athlete appropriately. So appropriate regulation reduces the chances of escalation into the red zone. Next slide, please, Kelly. So this is just one example of a zone of regulation in a classroom, which I thought was really helpful for our audience today. So it sort of goes through what we just spoke about, but it's a visual for students. So it's okay for them to feel like they're in different zones. But then on the side where there's a square and the circle is some tools that they can use to de-stimulate or stimulate, depending on how they're feeling, so they can be aware of which zone they're in, and then we can get their optimal learning. Next slide, please, Kel. Perfect. So when we look at the sensory systems, we're looking at proprioception, which is our push, pull, and carry, or our body awareness. Auditory, which is our hearing. Olfactory, which is smell, used to identify danger, foul, pleasurable, strong, or faint. Tactile, to detect light touch, deep pressure, texture, temperature, vibration, and pain. And vestibular, so we detect movement through sensory receptors in the inner ear. And visual, which will help a child to see and detect objects. So it is important to identify behaviours that might be present when an individual is under or overstimulated in these sensory systems. So first we'll look at proprioception. So next slide, please, Kelly. Perfect. I think maybe the next slide again. Here we go. So proprioceptive will be, difficulty processing proprioception. The athletes may seem clumsy, frequently bumping into objects or using too much force. And if they're seeking proprioception, we see biting or chewing objects such as a sleeve or a jumper, a pen or a pencil. These children usually enjoy hugs or really tight pressure, and they usually bang body parts together. So they're banging hands or their jaw with their hand, or holding objects with excessive pressure. They can be seen to throw themselves heavily into objects or the floor. They really enjoy that crash and that pressure, and they like to sit with knees tucked under themselves. So these activities are extremely beneficial for regulating the body, and if an individual becomes overstimulated with sensory input from loud noise, bright light or movements, proprioceptive input will be beneficial. Sorry. And this sort of input does not tend to overstimulate but regulate. Activities for proprioception input follow the push, pull, and carry formula. So in OT, this could be seen as getting the child to carry something heavy, push a box of toys, carry wet washing out of the washing machine, or tug of war. So some activities that you might be useful for you in your programs, and we like to use in gymnastics as well, is our wall sit, wall push-ups, beanbag crashing, where the child runs and crashes into like a crash mat, obstacle courses, tug of war, body pillow, or therapy ball pressure. So that's when we have the child lay down and we move the ball over the child, obviously not hurting them, but they really enjoy that touch and that pressure. Weight-bearing activities, animal walks, yoga poses, and using the trampoline. Next slide, please, Kelly. Oh, those are some of the strategies that we just spoke about. And there we've got the ball going over the child. They usually really, really enjoy that. And yeah, it doesn't hurt them at all. And then the wall push-up. So again, something you could use in your classrooms. Hands, the visuals, just to show that we put our hands and we do our push-ups. Perfect. Auditory. So with our auditory, we like to keep instructions to a minimum and avoid multiple step instructions. We place individuals who struggle with auditory processing at the front of the group, away from any distracting stimuli. Allowing the individual to repeat back instructions and use visuals to support verbal instructions. And some strategies might be listening to music or regulation through music, as we spoke about before. Noise minimizing headphones, the quiet zone or activities, and musical instruments if they're seeking that auditory input. So if an individual is overstimulated from auditory input, a sensory or quiet zone may be beneficial. Next slide. So this is or it's not ours, but this is a quiet zone or a quiet den. So this can be used if child needs a bit of time out. And you can always put some toys in there, some fidget spinners, some stress balls, anything like that. And there's a quiet zone just in the corner as well. Sorry, just having like a bit of a coughing fit as we go. Okay, back on track. Olfactory. So this is what we call taste. And it can have direct input to the nervous system, which will trigger that fight, flight, or calm and steady response. So when we look at hypersensitivity, this can trigger emotions or memories from a negative viewpoint and may elicit the gag reflex or nausea and vomiting. And when we look at hypersensitivity, this is craving strong smells that triggering a calming response. So scented lotions or Play-Doh for the individual to play with, attaching scented packs or like smelly little things to the drink bottles. Usually I've seen them in lavender, which is a calming response. Using diffusers or scented lip balms, and opening windows or using just the fresh air from those windows. When we look at, sorry, next slide, Kelly. Perfect, onto tactile. So an athlete may be hypersensitive to touch if they avoid what we call tactile defensiveness. So difficulty touching certain textures, hypersensitivity if they don't notice. So sometimes they don't notice a messy face and they struggle with fine motor activities, or they seek tactile input. So they're constantly touching things and enjoy different textures. Tactile activity can be easily overstimulating. To reduce this overstimulation, so we go into the red zone, we can implement proprioceptive activity, which is the first activities that we spoke about, and afterwards to ensure that the individual stays within their optimal green ready to go zone. So some activities for touch is our therapy, and this OTs love therapy. It's essentially a really hard Play-Doh, which is really hard to squeeze. And I think Elise can jump in at the end about this one. It definitely does have some really good sensory benefits. I think these are on the next slide, actually, Kelly. Yep. And then we just want to provide lots of opportunity to explore touch and incorporate touch into games and activities. This can be seen through just catching with a spiky ball, popping bubble wrap if you're having a rest break. We can walk along different textures. Barefoot is what we like, is best, but we can always wear socks if there's sensitivities. We should usually hide objects in bins of rice. So like finding the plastic dinosaur in that big bin of rice, using a fidget bag to find the squishy toy or feeling to find, and making sure that we always utilize firm pressure, not light touch. It is really not reinforcing for tactile defensive individuals if we just, really lightly touch. So if we're going to touch, it's really firm so we can get that across. And have the individual go at the front or the back of the line. Also massaging lotion into hands and sensory sand as well. So these are some of the things we just spoke about. There's that different texture that the child's walking on, those sensory bins with the rice. And then the last picture, which I think is so useful for classrooms, is a tactile learning card. So get the child to paint on or paste on like rice and things that can touch. And then they actually go over the letter with the touch, and feeling that tactile feeling actually communicates to the brain in a kinesthetic way of learning. So it's just triggering a different aspect of learning for individuals that respond to this sort of touch, which is really cool. Next slide. So vestibular. So this is the one where to do with our inner ear, and it usually comes from moving, swinging, going upside down, anything like that. So hypersensitive to vestibular, we avoid movement, are very cautious of movement, and we often move really slowly. Commonly poor posture and difficulty with concentration is also seen with individuals with hypersensitivity. And individuals prefer sedentary activities or activities with their feet staying on the floor. Hypersensitivity, we're always on the go, we seek movement and difficulty sitting still. Presents with difficulties in writing and concentrating sometimes. We've reduced fear of dangerous activities and can be seen as quite impulsive. Vestibular input can be quite alerting to the sensory system, and it can be good to follow these activities again with proprioceptive input, just to regulate and to help prevent that overstimulation, which is what we spoke about as the red zone. So some strategies would be going along a balance beam, catching on a therapy ball, so those really big yoga balls, rolling on the therapy ball, so get the child to go on their tummy, using their arms and their feet to push off. The sausage roll, which is what we have here, it's got quite a funny name. So you roll the child up nice and tight, and then unroll them, and they usually love that one too. Going on swings, just having their head upside down. So if you can promote like hands on the ground, feet up on the wall for a mini handstand, that's usually something they really enjoy. Animal walk, so our bear walk, our crab walk, just running, jumping or dancing, climbing stairs, jumping jacks, or on the scooter board. And then we've just got an example of the balance beam here as well. Next slide, please. Visual. So with our visual hypersensitivities, we may experience discomfort with bright lights and prefer to work within darker environments. Individuals can be easily distracted by visual stimuli such as movement, toys, windows, and doorways. Hypersensitivities may miss objects in competing backgrounds and may struggle to name or match colours, shapes, and sizes. They often do not take too much notice or may even enjoy bright lights, reflectives, or spinning objects with lights. So some strategies are wearing sunglasses, kaleidoscopes, visual timers or oil timers, wearing a hat to reduce the glare, or moving away from visual clutter, and lowering or brightening the lights depending on the sensitivity. So lots of strategies that we've spoken about are already hidden through sport or play activities, such as the animal walks, bouncing, quiet corners, music, dancing, marching, swinging, and sometimes as easy as taking a break. But I guess what I like to communicate to my coaches is that it's so important to read the athlete and see what gets the most optimal outcomes, what relaxes them, and I guess what escalates the behaviours that you're not wanting to see, because then you can identify the triggers. So from these triggers, you can, implement the strategies into rotations. We usually use rotations in gymnastics. And then we can, have that vestibular input and put the proprioception after it just to make sure that they're regulated. We promote having drink breaks. We've also always got animal walks and things like that. And like if I asked one of the coaches what proprioceptive input, they wouldn't know, but we do know that they're there and they have those benefits, those therapeutic benefits. So if we can identify them and slot them in, like they're not even noticeable, but they do get those really good outcomes. So implementing these techniques into rotations has had positive outcomes for our programs. Just as I spoke about the animal walks, jumping, wall push-ups, they're really easily implemented and they regulate your athlete, which I guess is the most important. So yeah.
Thanks, Taylah. Some wonderful insight to, I guess, the occupational therapy perspective of sensory sensitivities. So I've certainly been thinking about a few things, and I know there's some questions that have come through which we will leave for the end, but I've noticed some questions down about some sensory inputs for perhaps adolescents and the older group as well. So we'll get our thinking caps on and get to those questions in a minute. But that was a great overview of the different sensory inputs and where people with autism may be hyper or hyposensitive to those specific inputs. So thank you, Taylah. I would just go back to sharing my screen again, and hopefully this works. Here we go. So let's see. So I know this probably hasn't come up in the best formats, but I'm just going to go with this. We are really lucky today to have Stephen Lawley, who's one of our Special Olympics Australia athlete leaders, and we're very proud to have Stephen with us today. You can see Stephen on the screen there with his sister Kim. I will actually flip back to this slide. So Stephen has been with the Special Olympics movement for over 20 years, and his sports include basketball, swimming, tenpin bowling, and I think he plays a bit of golf at the moment. He's represented Special Olympics Queensland at numerous national games, and he's also represented Australia at the New Zealand Invitational Games. And about 3 years ago, Stephen moved into a mentor and assistant basketball coach role with Special Olympics, and you can see in the team picture on the left of your screen. Hopefully you can do it. I'm just a bit loath to flick to the full slide because I know my computer has been doing some funny things of late. But you can see Stephen here with his gold medal from the 2014 National Games. And on the right, Stephen is proudly wearing his newly presented coach's T-shirt with his just as proud mum and sister supporting him. And Stephen will be supported by Kim today, and you can see Kim in the picture, and she might also give us some insight into the journey that they've travelled as a family. And Kim is also a Special Olympics athlete coach, so lots of insight and experience to share. Stephen has completed the Special Olympics Australia Athlete Leadership Program, which is designed to give people or interested athletes the leadership skills both within Special Olympics and the wider community. So we might hear about a bit of those roles later, but I do want to play a clip that Stephen has pre-recorded for this webinar, and it's around some sensory sensitivities from his perspective. And this recording not only gives the perspective of Stephen, but it's also a great example of Stephen's own self-regulation and a great approach of Kim to redirect and support his communication. So it is on a small screen, but hopefully it will come across. Actually, I think I need to show that there. I should have done that all along. Just bear with me. Here we go.
Thank you for having me as part of the webinar series. I feel honoured to be involved.
That's great, Stephen. Would you like to talk about your own personal sensory sensitivities?
I personally don't like wearing wool. I feel it makes me itchy, and I can't answer for other athletes what their own sensory sensitivities are. That's not to say that I haven't seen people that do have sensory sensitivity challenges, so that they may have autism but they may not have sensory. So in sport, sensory sensitivity could be like noise, so whistles or crowds noises, or atmosphere. At competitions it could be something like fireworks that could trigger an athlete's sensory sensitivities, and could also affect anyone with autism. So this is where coaches need to have the education to be able to know what triggers anyone or what triggers the athletes with autism, so that they can ensure that that athlete doesn't have a meltdown. Not me personally, but I have witnessed other athletes with sensory sensitivities, some of which can be lights, noise, travelling, and the family need to let the coaches know what those triggers can be so that the coaches can better support the athletes in those scenarios. That if they do have any issue travelling, that parents, so I can't.
That's okay. Just refocus and come back around. So it's travel. So what are the experiences you've witnessed of an athlete with sensory sensitivity while travelling?
I think needing to be at the front of the plane if they have motion sickness.
Thanks, Stephen. What fabulous insight we've got, and I think we will hear a lot more from you in our live Q&A at the end. I know in our practice sessions you've come up with some great stories and great perspectives, so we can't wait to hear that at the end of the webinar. So thank you very much for sharing those thoughts. So I am going to hand over to Kellie now. So Kellie is going to talk about some sensory sensitivities and her experience both as the founder and through her work of the AAA Sports Ballarat program, but also as a mum of a son who has autism and experiences a widened sensory perception. So I will hand over to Kellie now. Right, Kel, we just need your microphone. We've got a good review of all the slides there now. Here we go.
Sorry, everyone. I knew I'd do that, go back to the beginning of the slideshow, so my apologies for that.
And just your video, Cal, if we could.
There we go.
Beautiful. Okay.
Here we go. So I'm going to share with you guys today a bit of a lived experience for my son, Cooper, who is autistic. Cooper's 8 years old and was diagnosed in 2015 with autism and comorbid anxiety. So Cooper has always loved sport and loved being a part of sport, and it's a really important part of his sensory toolkit. He uses sport to help calm himself and to get himself back on track when things aren't quite going right for him. We were very lucky to be invited by the AFL to go to an Auskick halftime match down at the MCG a couple of years ago. This was going to be an amazing experience. But when we got there, the children were ushered down, and you can see in this photo on the screen here, to underneath the MCG into one of the locker rooms down there. There was 100 kids, all so excited to be going out onto the middle of the MCG, crammed in this one room. The noise was horrendous, kids laughing, yelling, and it was just not a great experience. When we got there, the kids were all given a uniform, and instead of finding out what the kids' sizes were, they were just given a random uniform. So you can see where the yellow arrow there is. That's my son Cooper, who has been given a top that's 5 times too big for him. So we had to roll the sleeves right up to his shoulders. The feel of that top on his skin was so awful for him that I think it's quite easy for you all to see from this picture, these beautiful, happy, calm faces in this photo, and then my poor boy on the sidelines there, who's had to roll his sleeves right up to his shoulders, he's chewing his nails, he's clenching his fists, just so uncomfortable in his own skin. Now, Cooper kept saying to me, Mum, I just need to take this top off. I just need to get this top off. But of course, we couldn't take it off. He was about to run out into the middle of the MCG. And in one of my not so great parenting moments, I said, just keep it on, Coop, until we get on the MCG. Big mistake, because the minute my boy put one foot on to the grass of the MCG, he ripped that t-shirt off and threw it behind him and took off running across the oval to play footy with his mates. Now, this really wasn't that big of an issue. It's what he needed in that moment to be able to participate with his friends. Cooper went on to play football perfectly with his mates in the middle of the MCG that day. He actually kicked 4 goals once he got that t-shirt off, and he was happy. He did not chew his nails for the rest of the afternoon after getting that top off him. So just, I guess what I want to show from this is how the lack of planning from us as coaches, I guess, for that day and for Cooper and for his needs really caused some major issues for him. Fast forward a couple of months, we were really excited to be invited for Cooper to be a mascot, to walk out on the ground with the Western Bulldogs at one of their matches. I was obviously very cautious after the experience we'd had with the uniform at the last event. I was very, very cautious. So I made a phone call to the Western Bulldogs directly and asked them if we could do a little bit more planning this time to make sure that this was a really good experience for him. I wanted a uniform that fit him in the correct size. I wanted that uniform to be delivered to us 2 weeks prior to the event so that Cooper could wear it around home, get used to it and get used to the feel of it, and so that I could wash it so it would soften up, all those sorts of things. I also knew that there was going to be fireworks and things going off as Cooper ran out on the ground. So I wanted a little bit of a practice with him, with the player that he was going to be running out holding hands with, so that he was familiar with what that process would look like. All of that planning meant that I think we can all see the difference in this child here to the child that was standing in the change rooms, biting his nails and clenching his fists and completely uncomfortable in his own skin. This photo is just before he's about to run out through the banner with the Western Bulldogs, and he was the happiest little boy of his life. When those fireworks were going off around him, he did flinch to look at them, but he was ready for them because we'd prepared him for that. So I guess the point I'm trying to get across to you all as coaches today is that that little bit of planning that you do prior to your sessions, prior to events, prior to classes will make the world of difference in the experience for the child. One resource that I use at AAA Sport is the sensory profile, and we have talked in previous webinars about the individual player profile, where we collect all of that information about our participant and find out, you know, what their sensory needs are and all that sort of stuff. So one example, we can assume that maybe on an individual player profile, a parent's highlighted that their child is hypersensitive to touch and seeks out physical contact, often resulting in him being really rough and having no sense of space. And also that he's prone to hand flapping if he feels anxious. So if that information came through my IPP, I would get out one of these sensory profile templates. I would, in the touch box, make sure I put that he can be quite physical with other students, can throw himself into walls and floors, and I would also add, that he might struggle with personal space. In the strategies section there, I would then come up with some strategies that I could use to implement in my classes. So I might provide sensory breaks prior to starting the program. For example, Cooper at school, when he has a PE class coming up, his teachers 15 minutes before his PE class will take him outside and he'll go for a walk around the schoolyard with a teacher just to give him some sensory input before he gets to class. So that little bit of planning helps him to be able to focus in his class. I might incorporate some sensory movement breaks into the program, like hand claps or wall pushing, or using bump pads to help regulate that need for push and pull. And I would also make sure that in my sensory toolkit that I have as part of my program, that I have a lap blanket there. So, you know, if they were starting to feel really dysregulated, they could have 5 minutes on the side with a lap blanket on their laps. And in the body awareness box, I would put that they're prone to hand flapping and stimming. And then in the strategies part of that box, I would put that it's really important. I want to stress this. It's really important not to take away stimming from a child. Stimming is actually a calming tool for them. So we don't want to take away that behaviour. But we are able to replace that behaviour with a similar, repetitive, probably more socially acceptable sort of movement or action. Cooper, for example, carries around a blob of blue tack when he's going to play sport. So he keeps a blob of blue tack in his pocket and he'll constantly play with that. So he could be catching the football in his hands, but he'll still have the blue tack in his hands so that when he gets rid of it, he can start fiddling with his blue tack as well. So the sensory profile, is a really good tool to add to your IPPs, so your individual player profiles within your programs. Always consider the equipment that you might use. So you can use noise cancelling headphones for children that are having trouble with loud noises. You can use the blue tack or a fidget spinner. You can use tactile balls, so balls that have a surface on them, or bell balls if they're looking for noise. There's also bell balls that you can get. Use a visual schedule to help keep them on track if they're having trouble focusing too. So I'll show you a quick example of one that I use in my program. This is just a keychain that the child attaches to their pocket. It's got something that they can fiddle with, but it also has all the activities that I want them to take part in. So as they do each activity, we will go through, and when we get to the end, we have a finish one, and they know that we're finished now. I can go and do something else. Sunglasses is always a great thing to have in your sensory toolkit. A pinwheel, and that seems like a really strange one probably, but you know those pinwheels that you blow? I had a young boy who used to watch the whirlies on top of the school roof, and all he could focus on was that. So I gave him a pinwheel to keep with him while he was participating in the program, and he would use the pinwheel, blowing the pinwheel to get that same input that he was looking for. Balance beams, as Taylah mentioned earlier, swings, crash pads, time timers are a really important tool. So to keep kids on track and to let them know that they haven't got much longer to go. visuals on bats and feet guides, which you can see in that picture there. I have a little carpet square with some Velcro feet that I can move into any position to show the children where their feet need to be positioned, and bubbles. They seem a little unconventional, but they can make your programs run a whole lot smoother. Important things to remember during a meltdown is not a teaching moment. So we just deal with what's happening in the moment. We don't try and teach them how to fix that or how to do it differently next time. Once they're out of the meltdown and things are calm, then's your teaching moment about what could we implement next time. But definitely during a meltdown is not a time to be trying to teach a child. Remember that if they achieve one skill for the day, that's a huge success. So just focus on one thing at a time. Keep a sensory toolkit close by. So in your classrooms, in your programs, always have a toolkit that might have fidget spinners, blue tack, headphones, tactile balls, all those sorts of things close by. Provide a safe place for someone to retreat to if things get too much for them, but make sure you've got a timer there so that they know that they need to return. We don't want that safe place to be a place that they go and then we can't bring them back to the program. So we need to set some really strong rules around how long they'll be there for and how long it'll be until they return. Don't wait for a sensory overload to occur. Try and prepare your sessions to prevent them from happening. So adding in these sensory breaks, thinking about the things that Taylah talked about earlier that you can add into your program to help calm during the process is always a much better way to go. All right, I'm going to hand over to Elise now. I've just got a little... Elise is the founder of Active Support and is an Indigenous VFL player, an AFL Disability Ambassador, autism activist, consultant, speaker and mentor. As an athlete, Elise has reached some amazing milestones. She's competed in the Women's National Premier League for soccer, represented Victoria twice in the Youth Girls AFL National Championships. She's made the AFL Indigenous national team and has played VFLW at both the Western Bulldogs and currently at Essendon Football Club. Elise is also qualified as a teacher's aide, community worker and personal trainer. Elise has become an incredible autism advocate who presents a positive approach to autism and is changing the way the world perceives autism from a burden to an investment in their potential. Elise's ability to speak about her experience living with autism is helping create better inclusion, understanding and acceptance of autism for teachers, coaches, parents and students, and an openness to embrace disability and diversity. So welcome, Elise.
Thanks, Kellie. That sounds really good.
That's because you are amazing.
Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of land and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge all identities on this platform. I'd also, a bit of a disclaimer, like to say that I'm sharing my own lived experience, not everyone's with autism, and sensory sensitivities and widened sensory perceptions are only one aspect of being on the autism spectrum, and that there are a range of parts of autism that make up the diagnosis. And what we speak about alone today is it's not all of autism, it's just one part, but it's very important. So we've already gone through, I've come really prepared from the previous speakers. So that's great. So we've already covered the sensory processes. So talking about my own sensory processing sensitivities. So in terms of sound and auditory processing, listening and receiving information, my hearing is a function of the ears and listening is a function of the brain. And I have excellent and sensitive hearing, but I struggle listening. I struggle processing auditory input, and especially if what I'm receiving is instructions, for me to then implement them requires executive functioning, to like being able to initiate and order steps to complete tasks. I often need prompts to do the simple tasks. I often tell people stop yelling when they're in the room because they are quite loud, and they say that they aren't yelling, and I look at my mum and mum's like, they're not yelling. Equally though, because what I'm hearing is quite loud, I then match the volume, and people tell me I'm the loudest person in the room, when really I'm actually matching what I'm receiving, which is at a higher volume. In terms of volume, I hear every little thing at the same sound. So to put that in perspective, if someone is tapping and then someone's clicking and then someone's yelling, I'm hearing that all at the same volume. So when there's background noise, it's really hard for me to distinguish what someone's saying. And then you've got their facial expressions and everything else, their intonation. I have an aversion to high-pitched sounds, and that includes like water running. I can hear all the intricate parts. In terms of sport, an umpire's whistle. Voice intonation, I really struggled. I'm not sure if I should drop her name. I probably will protect her privacy. Didn't quite like her, so I could. But anyway, I had a science teacher, and she would always talk like this. Hi guys, and I struggled. I really struggled rocking up, and I would always say to myself, "This is a class that I'm going to be different." And I'd rock up and I'd do something quite inappropriate and get sent out. And yeah, I'm easily distracted. In terms of touch, I struggle a lot with dirt, and I wash my hands in a game quite a bit. I love putty. I'm actually playing with putty at the moment. I love putty, but personally dislike goo and slime. But I do have clients who quite like goo and slime. How that plays out in terms of me playing footy, I think there was the opening two pictures. One of them was actually me playing for the Western Bulldogs, and you can see it was a live game, and I have the ball, but I've actually got my fingertips just off the ball, because even in a game, I have quite an aversion to, depending on how used the ball is. Normally in VFL games, the ball's brand new pretty much, so that's always good, but when the ball's being used, I struggle even more. However, if it's being used, getting into detail, but if it's being used in terms of out in the sun and it's cracked, those divots, I like that. I just don't like it being completely smooth, and new balls have a bit of grip on them. In terms of my feet, I don't like walking on smooth surfaces, so I like concrete with the pebbles in it. I don't like touch, but I love deep pressure. So I love deep pressure, but if you were to lightly put your hands across my skin, that would hurt for me. Eye spray when strapping, like when they put the spray before you get strapped, that is excruciatingly cold, and I don't like it. And in the atmosphere of football, or at least in elite football, you don't want to be seen as being soft, but I just can't stand it, and everyone else, like, they'll see me going like that, and yeah, it's just difficult for me. In terms of uniform, I prefer to own the piece of clothing by it so I can cut off the tag. I'm told I am very rough, and that I have only an on or an off switch rather than a dimmer. And I struggle actually coming home from a football game if mum is in the kitchen and she happens to be in the way of the fridge. I have a few times hip and shouldered her accidentally, and she was not impressed because she's getting old in her as time goes on, naturally. But it's not the way, but and also in terms of food, halftime chewing. I love chewing, but I really struggle stopping myself when there's a banquet of halftime oranges, lollies, cordial, and banana bread. So a third time stitch is not, well, it's something, it's quite common for me. In terms of smells, like aromas, when people put on Lynx or odor deodorants and perfume, I find that quite overwhelming. However, if it's a safe smell, when I was trying to change, I was called up to play Bulldogs and was playing in a matter of 4 days, 3 or 4 days. And in order to transition from my old team to the Western Bulldogs, I asked my team manager what her perfume was, and I sprayed it on like just around my bag, so that when I came into the Western Bulldogs, I could smell the same sense of where I used to be. That was quite helpful. In terms of sight, lights at night time, my vision is pretty bad. So I'm that person with yellow glasses over my glasses that you buy for old people. Sun, I constantly have the blank white dots in my sight, like constantly, unless I'm wearing sunglasses. I struggle with direct eye contact, and I used to play, so Corona masks aren't good, but I used to play with prescription sunglasses and stopped that after getting a few too many black eyes, but I did get that approved. So yeah, these are my sensory preferences and aversions, and not everyone with autism has these, as we're tuned differently. So the other thing that we don't really talk about, we actually have we have a bit over 20 senses rather than the 6 senses. And so I just wanted to touch on them a little bit, because these are also play a massive role and in my experience with autism. So we've got our sense of heat and sense of cold. In winter, I'm often asked, aren't you cold? Because I'm wearing shorts. And in the summertime, I'm wearing short singlet and a beanie. I have clients as well who don't wear, they don't feel the cold at all, and they'll be wearing always shorts and a t-shirt, even on the coldest of days. We've also got our perception of pain. It's not that we don't feel pain. I hear that a lot, but it's not that we don't feel pain. It's that I struggle to register exactly where my pain is coming from, and being able to locate and rate the pain is extremely difficult. Instead, it will come out as irritable and uncontrollable behaviour. And actually, sometimes it comes out in self-harm, even though what I'm struggling with is the pain. I do have a high tolerance for certain types of pain, but then again, with certain other feelings, I have a really low tolerance where other people find it easy. And my mum's calling me. Sorry. And then we have our perception of body awareness. So despite me being good at gross motor skills, I am extremely clumsy. I am great. I'm good at sport, but I struggle with, I have an established meaning of pouring water into the cup, meaning pouring water everywhere around the cup, but not in the cup. In terms of like sense of gravity, air, wind, and motion, I get really bad motion sickness, which is quite common for people on the spectrum. And then there's the chemical senses, like the hormonal releases, which trigger social responses. So feelings of hunger for food, water, and air. I can't stand the feeling of hunger, and I smile at very inappropriate times, including when I'm told something's sad or I'm in pain. I might laugh. Other things, sense of danger. I had no sense of danger as a child, and now need to prompt myself of dangerous situations. So I'd often just wander off and talk to strangers, which could be a normal kid, but for me it was a 2-year-old going on top of a 10-meter diving board and just jumping off when I couldn't swim. And I wasn't scared. I had many experiences nearly drowning. It takes a lot longer for me to learn things. However, when the hyperfocus comes in, I can spend a lot more time investing in it. I wear the same clothes all the time. I have a small part of clothes that I pick from. I wear the same clothes, and Mum's often frustrated because she buys me some nice clothes, and I can appreciate that they're nice, but they're not mine, and I struggle with that change. And not picking up visual cues is another photo I should have shared, but basically it's a photo of me at the Western Bulldogs, and everyone was wearing the same clothes and the same uniform, and I just did not pick up that I was the only one not doing that. Good thing was, though, I was told, but instead of having to go back, I was able to wear it. But I just didn't pick up that everyone was in uniform. And this was pre-game. I need a lot of movement breaks. So these are all aspects and senses that we don't regularly hear spoken about or recognised, but play a massive part in my role, in my life and experience in the world on the autism spectrum. So I had a question come through of, are there sensitivities that I can get over earlier? So I thought I'd cover this. There is such thing as desensitizing myself, which is beneficial in making myself able to participate. However, the process is uncomfortable. An example of this is me wheeling the equipment trolley on the way to the PE class hall, or exposing myself prior to that similar action or touch that I'm going to be doing. And trying different things while I'm feeling safe, able, and prepared. Sensory sensitivities are a need. It's not simply behavioural, and the behaviour comes because the sensory needs are not being met. This process of desensitizing is only successful if I do it naturally and feel safe, as when it's done by others and pushed onto me, I might become obedient over time, but it also then I learn that my needs are invalid, and then it becomes refusal to do it in the future. This leads to problems and mental health issues along the track. So the process is really, really important. In regards to sensitivities and desensitizing myself, when I was younger, I needed certain balls with certain grips. So basketball, it needed to be an outdoor basketball with the grips. But smooth basketballs, I really, really struggled with. The opposite, so that's still my preference, the grips, but I have learnt to be able to deal with that because I handle footballs every day. I can handle mud and footballs, but I also use water during the game to clean my hands and wet them throughout the game. I can also train in wet weather, though I prefer to have a hat on to keep it being out of my face. There are also sensory needs that I've learnt to seek that are socially acceptable, and I've replaced that. For example, instead of rocking, I would get a soccer ball under the desk and roll my foot with my ball. Roll my ball with my foot. And so, yeah, that meant that bullies didn't see that part of me as being weird. A story about how these sensitivities have affected my time playing sport, and how the people in your team coach and were able to modify and adapt to assist you to have a better experience. So when I was younger, people perceived me as naughty. And then as I started getting older and I had the same struggles, instead of being the naughty child, I was then the challenging adolescent. Because my needs weren't being understood, they were seen as unreasonable, and they were met with the request of just get over it. For example, so for an example of these would be the bib. So when I was younger, I would take the bib off. I wouldn't say I don't want to wear it. I would just take it off, and it would be seen because of the smell, and it would be seen as being naughty. And as I've gotten older, then I'm able to say, no, I don't want to. It smells, I can't do it. And then it's seen as challenging. Somehow, though, playing at elite level, people seem to earn the right to have your own way of doing things, because there are a lot of players that have superstition and practices. Mine aren't superstitions, but I guess in that sense, they're not actually seen as a disability, even though it's a disability related need. I can get away with it. So at a community level, pre-game preparation, I was able to stay in the medical room just because it was quiet. But when changing clubs to an elite level club, it wasn't understood or known. The team had created a soundtrack of all the different players' favourite songs to play prior to the game. And it was pump up music, and it was quite loud. To cope with this and reduce the loud music, I wore noise cancellation headphones. But this was misunderstood as me listening to my own music and was seen as me excluding myself from listening to the one sound, which we like as one. Instead, what was actually happening for me was the loud music was meaning the room wasn't accessible, and so I could stay included, I reduced the sound. What was seen as an inclusive practice by me, what was seen as an inclusive practice by the team actually excluded me, and my attempt to make myself included was seen as me excluding myself. So my point of that is just misunderstandings and lack of communication or lack of being open can lead to people not understanding why behaviours are happening. An example with Essendon is there was a team exercise where we had to bunch up as a team and collect balls. But being inside this huddle was far too overwhelming for me. I could hear the breathing, I could hear the shuffling of the feet, the feeling of the temperature of everyone. It was quite overwhelming, and I was like, no, I'm going to have a meltdown. I can't cope with it. I initially felt disheartened and excluded because I took myself to the outside, but I really wanted to be part of this. And I was like, my autism always gets in the way. It was just a low point in my headspace. But then a teammate prompted me to be the eyes and the voice of the team and direct the team as a whole of where the balls were. Of course, there were like a few players that said, Elise, come in the group. They were trying to be inclusive. Elise, come in the group. But it was then that teammate that told me about having a different role and being the eyes of the team. She said, Elise is playing her role. We need her to do this. It's allowed. And coming from a teammate, this made a massive difference. And it was a massive inclusion step. And the coach actually noticed this and me stepping from the back and still saw me participating and followed up with me giving me permission to find my own way of being part of the team, as inclusion doesn't mean everyone doing the same thing. From there, I actually said, well, the huddles are quite hard for me. You'll see that I normally stand on the outside. And he said, yep, that's okay. The difference was when I was doing this at the community level, I was quite far apart. But then when I did it at Essendon and I was given permission to stand far apart, my anxiety reduced and I was actually gradually able to come closer. That was a great kind of learning experience for me. So there was a situation as well. We were separated with our line coaches, so mids together in a group, forwards and then backs. But because I could hear the coaches from the other group speaking, I was distracted. I couldn't hear. So I just asked the coach, sorry, can we just move a few meters that way? And he goes, yep. Took it in 2 seconds and just continued delivering it without asking why, and I didn't feel shamed. And then he came up to me at the end and said, hey, if I ever do that again, just let me know. I'll try to cater for that. And it didn't make me feel bad at all. And I was like, that's great. That's inclusion. And the point was that at an elite level, they want you to hear the message, where at a community level, my experience has been that what's good for most is good enough. An example, at the Western Bulldogs, it got approved for me to be able to hold a football while on the bench, which made a massive difference. At an elite level as well, the water runner is a trainer who's familiar with me and knows to keep bringing out the water to desensitize my hand. Not sure if they know that's the reason. They just know I do a weird thing where I take drink the water and then wet my hands. But at a community level, it's normally a random volunteer who wouldn't know that. When I injured my ankle, I was not able to cope with people coming up to me and talking to me. So this was last year, and I injured my ankle quite badly, and I just shut down, and I was just couldn't cope with that. And instead, a friend who knew me came over and told people to go away and just put a blanket over me. And I sat there for about 15 minutes and then was able to become regulated and then able to process the questions and explain that I had what was wrong with my ankle, and that was, yeah, a lot better than the alternative of people continuing to come, and I could have then had a meltdown and either harmed myself or become quite explosive. In terms of the whistle, well, I was really struggling with the sound of the whistle, so I became an umpire, so I could also learn the rules and desensitize myself. And I would, prior to playing the games, which were normally in the evenings, I'd umpire in the mornings, the junior levels, and desensitize myself so it didn't impact in my game. And another example was Western Bulldogs. Devo, the coach, after she explained to the whole team what to do, she'd come up to me and say, you just need to focus on one thing. There are a lot of examples, and at the end of the day, I often, I often have a person or a pet lay on me, and it calms me down, and I need that to be able to calm down. So yeah, there are a lot of examples, but meeting my needs, they're like the success examples, but meeting my needs haven't really become a regular occurrence, and I don't think they are for someone with a disability. They are seeing a lot. We see a lot of people who don't understand and who then either become frustrated at us or just perceive us as stupid. Like, for example, physio asking me to turn over on my back, I would take time to go turn over on my back, and because that's quite a lot to take in and to understand without visuals. And yeah, my experience normally is that then they become frustrated and annoyed. And stimming, yelling out chicken nugget while playing, actually isn't a bad thing when teammates, the opposition becomes annoyed, because it just fires them up more, but it's something that I do that's quite helpful. I think, yeah, what we can do is locate what the issue is and support the need rather than try to control the behaviour. Instead of keeping me at home and keeping me from the environment, let me wear headphones, let me have what I need. My self-soothing behaviour is not, if it's not harming anyone, let it be. If I need to rock, let me rock. Ensure I have time to self-regulate and recharge before going out and doing things. Just understand that your perception and your experience and processing of the world is not mine. My eyes are tuned a little different. My skin is tuned differently. My perception of light is also different. We don't just see the world differently. We experience the world differently. And we're not from another world. We're not from another planet. We are in the same world, but on a different level. I have autism. I play elite sport. And in order for me to show up at my best, I need you to have an open mind and sense the world from my eyes and my skin. That's it, Kelly.
Thanks, Elise. That was fabulous. Once again, always learn so much from your perspective, and you know, you're always so willing to share your stories and wonderful insight that we would never have the privy to be able to learn from if you don't share them. So I've just asked Kelly to get up the photo there of Elise not wanting to touch the ball, that Elise the photo you were referring to. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, so that sensory sensitivity with that tactile touch, that, you know, Elise has been able to become a very good and elite player in the Australian Football League. So I think she's done exceptionally well to be able to overcome those sensory sensitivities, but also be supported along the way. So well done to you, Elise. Fabulous. So we'll go to a bit of Q&A now, and I'll just get everyone to turn their microphones on. There was a question for Stephen. We do have a few questions coming through, so I'm just sorting through them now. Stephen, there was a question about how has an understanding of sensory sensitivities helped you in your coaching?
Yeah, I had answered that one.
You did? Oh, yeah, fabulous.
So I replied back and answered that.
Could you just give us an insight to that answer, because I missed that? Are you able to do that for us?
Yeah, just let me pull up the answer. So I just put, it has made me more aware of the athletes and the processes needed. I've also been able to educate the fellow coaches around regulations and meltdowns. So that's the answer I've put.
Fabulous. Thanks, Stephen. So do you have an understanding of the team that you're coaching? Do you have an understanding of their sensitivities?
Yes, I feel that I'm aware of what their sensitivities are.
And you can support them.
Yes.
Fabulous answer. I'm sorry I missed that. I was looking forward to that answer, so I'm glad you were able to repeat that. We do have a question coming through, and this is a question which is probably for Taylah, but I think it's for everyone. The question's about basically how do you accommodate participants or students with autism in a mainstream class? And this is the question that comes up all the time, and as a teacher I know it's really hard to accommodate everyone. What are your tips and strategies? Maybe we'll start with you, Taylah, first. How do you accommodate those students or pupils or participants in mainstream class?
I think it goes back to just being adaptable. We talk about diverse learners in our program, and not everybody learns the same, so it is important that we have the auditory really clear instructions, that you have a visual to support what you're asking, and that also if you can demonstrate, or if you can let the participant feel the movement if it's what you're asking them to do, that way you address all types of learning for people with autism or without. I know I learn visually, and that might be different to somebody who just needs the instructions. So we really encourage that. And then also, like with the planning ahead, all kids like to know what comes next. And, those visual boards, they support all learning. I know at my primary school, when that was, we used to have what we're doing for the day. And I never thought of that as, something to support learning for ASD, but I know that was really helpful. So I guess if you can just target it to all the participants in the sense that how would this support somebody to learn if they didn't learn all the same way, then that's how you can look at it, I guess.
Sarah, I might just pipe in here if that's all right.
Go for it.
I'm a big believer in this is a great opportunity for us to educate and to create better spaces for the future for our kids and for our adults with autism. So, don't be afraid to educate that these things can be part of a class and not necessarily have to be outside of the normal. So let's just buddy them up with a partner, use those sorts of things, get leaders within your classrooms or within your clubs to buddy up with the child, and then to set a great example for the rest of your club and for the rest of your class. These are teaching opportunities for us with neurotypical kids as well. So, use that as a teaching tool.
Thanks, Kelly. And I think that's come across in the previous webinars, that your message is, buddy up. So using those buddies, you can use that within a PE class setting, or you can also use that within a sports coach programming setting as well. So some of those tips that you've said in these previous webinars have also come up today from I think from Kelly, from Elise, beg your pardon. We're talking about her teammates really supporting her and advocating for her, and having that understanding of what her sensory needs are. So hopefully that has answered that question. It's not an easy task, but if we can put those strategies in place, using the buddies, using the visuals. And another thing that's come across today is that pre-planning. So Elise was wheeling that trolley out. Kelly, with your son, you pre-planned that tactile feeling of the top before he ran out onto the ground for the second time. So I think there's some of the themes that have come through as well. This may sort of be a bit related to the last question, but it is one that I was thinking about, that at an organisational level, how do you teach your coaches and your teachers to meet the needs of all your athletes and participants? So, you might gather that information, but then how do you put that into practice? How do you upskill your coaches and your teachers to be able to be supportive of everybody in your program?
There needs to be really clear communication between parents and coaches, and really clear communication between teachers and PE teachers. Quite often kids will go from their normal classroom where they're fully supported with lots of sensory aids and tools to get them through their day, but they'll go to their sport class and the sport teacher won't have any insight into what works for this child or what's going to help them in the event of a meltdown. So I think that we need to get better at communicating with each other, and for coaches, I think that's communicating with parents through individual player profiles, and having those conversations with families and to athletes themselves. There's no better person in the world to ask about what's going to help support them than an athlete with autism. Ask them, because I think Elise and Stephen would probably attest that if you ask them, they'd be happy to share with you what will help them to succeed, because they want to be successful. So don't be afraid to ask.
Thanks, Kellie. Stephen, as a coach, how do you go about understanding someone's sensory sensitivities? Do you ask them? How do you find out?
I'm not sure. I think it's just like witnessing it, like witnessing that behaviour firsthand.
Fabulous. And I know that, Kim, there's been fireworks mentioned twice in this webinar. So you've got a story about fireworks and about, I guess, the learning journey of supporting people with autism in sport. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I'll do the fireworks story. It was obviously over 20 years ago, when, I guess, before sensory sensitivity was even known, but I was fortunate enough to be at the 99 World Summer Games for Special Olympics in America, of all places, on the 4th of July. So we were in a big open field in North Carolina, and we were told of the fireworks for our athletes and the time. So we either put them all in a group. Back then there wasn't trendy technology, so most of them just had the old fingers in the ears or jumpers or the rubber plugs, or just the old-fashioned knockout headphones. And that was fine for our 10 minutes of fireworks. But then when you realise, when Special Olympics closing ceremony finished, that there's fireworks everywhere in America on the 4th of July. So we had athletes from every country just running around, stimming, self-regulating, having those, meltdowns on the field, to the point that I think, we all just sat there as a collective group, and just let the fireworks happen and let these guys have their moment just to calm down. And you couldn't take them anywhere, because wherever you took them, there was more fireworks. So if you tried to take them out the back of the field, there was more fireworks out the back there. So these days, again, we're told what time fireworks are for ceremonies, and we either remove the athletes from that space, or we put them there and tell them to put their headphones in, noise cancelling ones off, and then we just monitor what happens. Tay, question 2, the education, these platforms like SOA Learn and these webinars are amazing, but it's asking the questions, and just don't have the fear of asking the questions. There is no silly question when it comes to, learning about autism. I have, a 40-year-old brother, so 40 years of experience. I could still learn something new every day. So it's just being confident in asking, and Elise will contest as well. Sit down and have a chat to them. They don't bite, or if they do, it's not that hard. Depends on what you smell like, or you're wearing, or you're chewing at that time. But you know, these guys just have a wealth of knowledge and are more than happy to educate us about what's best for them. So
thanks for sharing that. And we did discuss that in our second webinar, is that it's counterintuitive to actually ask people a lot of questions, but I think in this situation it's quite important to, you know, get to know all about our participants and our athletes and ask those questions. Now, we have actually got to the end of time, and this has been so jam-packed of great information that we're going to skip a whole section. So Stephen had prepared some more videos for us just to talk about his pathways and being included as a leader in the Special Olympics movement, but also outside of Special Olympics. So we will get to that in our next webinar. I'm going to just share with you, hopefully I can do it here, just share with you some details. I'm going to flick through a bit of stuff there. So we do have our next webinar. It's about creating an inclusive program and environment. And once again, Kellie Tait will join us. We'll have Stephen featured on there. And we've got some other great coaches that have developed some amazing clubs that have set the bar really high for athletes predominantly with autism. So I'll send out some information about that very soon. I'm going to skip through another slides. We have some webinar resources on SOA Learn. If you want to learn more about autism, we have an Introduction to Autism Spectrum Disorder online module. It's all free on SOA Learn, so type that into your search engine. Whole range of other free resources that you can access, and we're really proud to have Sport Australia and Sport and Recreation Victoria support us in a lot of our great quality free resources that you can tap into to support people with intellectual disability and autism. And also AAA Play, if you want to find out more of what's going on in the inclusion space in Victoria, but this AAA Play is also a state government project that will support people with events, news items, and other useful bits of information, so you can get onto the Access for All Ability newsletter. And lastly, if you do want to contact any of our presenters today, we have run out of time. We had a lot more to talk about, but it's time to go home for all of those teachers who have stayed back after class. So you can reach out to us, tell us what you want to learn in the next webinar. And I really thank our presenters for sharing their experience, but especially to Stephen and to Elise, who've, you know, gives us the most valuable perspective of all of lived experience. And we really thank you for coming along and sharing that with us today. And look, we hope to see you at our next webinar. We hope you're enjoying them, and we'll say bye for now.
see ya. Thanks.